Report for today. It is a Friday edition. Today is Friday, the 21st day of February 2014. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me is my co-host, my son, fellow investigator Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Folks, you're about to hear an incredible 3-hour radio broadcast. We are really locked and loaded for tonight. Folks, you're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines, the bylines, the fog of disinformation, misinformation, deliberate diversion to bring you what's important, the news that's actually behind the news. For new listeners, and thank you very much for checking in with us here in the last couple of days, all the way in from Europe to South America, Central America, North America. God bless you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. For new listeners, we broadcast each and every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Our home base on the Internet is HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com. Don't be fooled by the name. We're not a government agency. How we selected that name is, of course, told in the story in the About Us section of our website. We're also simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. And folks, we're trying to do something tonight. So if you listen via computer and perhaps you listen via Blog Talk, you might want to try to listen to us via the Christians United Broadcasting Network. I would urge everyone there to give that a whirl. The where to listen there is, of course, the Hagmann and HagmannReport.com. Now, normally there's audio feed with that. However, there is none. There's video feed with that, but there's just audio. We are talking about changing that, going to an audio-video format here as well. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you very much for your belief and for your trust in us as we deal with these issues that are so pressing with all of us in this day. Ladies and gentlemen, I would just want to make a note here. I'd urge everyone to go to HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com during the program or at some point. Just make a note to go after the program. I was a guest in London, in the UK today, on the Richie Allen show on the People's Voice in London. This was a video interview that was done. It aired at between 4:30 and 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern time in London. It's a 20-minute interview. It's about the bankers. I think it's a pretty good interview. And a couple of things. One thing I found out: the People's Voice in London is they're kind of like us. They're independent. They've got a pretty good presence. A very, very robust listening audience, but they're also self-funded. It's kind of like us, listener supported. And if one thing I'd really appreciate this if you and I talked with the producer and I talked with Mr. Allen and others at the People's Voice, and I just found them to be extremely dedicated to getting the truth out to the people in London and the people in the UK and the people all across Europe. Drop them a note. Drop them a note of appreciation. Let them know that you listen to the broadcast. On HomelandSecurityUS.com, there's a link to the YouTube interview. And, of course, the People's Voice.tv. There's a link there as well. Just drop them a note and tell them that you saw the interview and that you support them. They are struggling to keep on the air, and they'd appreciate hearing from you. And I know that we've got the best audience in the world. I'll tell you that. Anytime we've ever asked you folks to do anything, it's always been done so well. And I mean, talk about dignity, the dignity of our audience and the decorum of our audience and the dedication. God bless you all. We want to thank you for that. Joe, welcome to tonight. We've got a lot of news to get into as well. We've got a lot of headlines. We've got a lot of important news to cover. And then, of course, we'll be taking your calls at the second half of the show.
Yeah, good to be here. Hopefully the broadcast on Blog Talk Radio stands up today and we don't have any issues of losing connection or losing audio, which the last 2 days has happened, and it's beyond our control as we try to understand what the reason is behind it, if there is any to find. But anyway, we do have some stuff to get into tonight, and I guess we'll start with this. It's a story we let off with yesterday about the FCC coming into newsrooms and wanting to be there and understand the selection of how the selection of news process works. But today, they say they have backed out of the FCC shelves newsroom survey after media. She has huge backlash. The Federal Communications Commission said on Friday that it was scrapping a controversial study decried by critics as a threat to the First Amendment right of freedom of press. The plan was to look at how news organizations should choose which stories to cover, overstep the bounds of what is required, admitted FCC spokeswoman Shannon Gilson. To be clear, media owners and journalists will no longer be asked to participate in the Columbia, South Carolina pilot study, Gilson said in a statement posted on the agency's website. The pilot will not be undertaken until a new study design is final, she said. Any subsequent marketing studies conducted by the FCC, if determined necessary, will not seek participation from or incline questions from media owners, news directors, or reporters.
You've got to understand, folks. This is they're shelving this particular version of this of the FCC study. They're shelving this version. They're not stopping their objective. They're not changing their plans. Their plans are the same. What they're doing is they're saying they're pulling the plug on this newsroom survey, and of course they couch this by saying for now. Yeah, we're shelving it for now.
Why not just go directly to the source, to the place where, I'm sure there is a body of power that dictates, what news should be covered above that of the news stations. It decides what news or what truths of today's time will be given to people and what won't.
Well, they've got to go through the motions, though. They've got to go through the obvious motions.
All the news companies don't get together and say, all right, Fukushima, we're not going to cover that, we're not going to cover this. There is a higher dictating body than that of the newsrooms. So either way, looking at this story, how can a FCC encroach on something that's already been encroached upon, I guess is my question.
Well, once again, I believe fully that the FCC, being the arm, and Larry from California had pointed out that, of course, this is not really a government agency in the truest sense of the word, and that's true. But at this point, really not. It's kind of beyond the scope of the program in this particular aspect of it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this: the FCC, their original plan of the survey, obviously, it would have taken the FCC out of its traditional purview of just merely regulating, but now looking in and conducting this CIN, this CIN, which is a critical information needs a survey, and into the various newsrooms. But here's the issue: they're not going to stop. They're not going. They might be, or they are saying they are shelving this particular initiative. But understand this: they are coming after the cable news, the not the network news. That's not their target. Their target is the new media, the media that's causing them the hurt. This has everything to do with the internet, with the internet regulations. It's a revised fairness doctrine type thing. So we've got to take a very close look at this and keep a very close eye on this, because they never stop what they're intending on doing. Oh, there's outcry now. Sure, there's outcry now. And it's pushed them back. Just like Syria. Think about that. We exposed Syria for exactly what it was. They stopped going through the front door. But yet, Kerry, the first of the year, told ISIS, hey, told Iraq, we're not going to stop ISIS, the terrorist group ISIS. So what Kerry did was greenlight ISIS to go through the southeast portion of Syria into Syria. That's the back door. That's the template for the FCC. This is exactly what they're going to do. They're not going to stop until they have complete control over all of the media, and that includes the internet. So just keep that in mind. This is something. This perhaps is the biggest story of the year so far. I would say that this is a domestic story of the year so far. We're going to keep our eyes on this as well. We're going to have to keep pushing back, keep exposing this. And it's interesting, too, how the mainstream media gave a yell, gave a shout, said, hey, I don't want to do this. Well, it's still coming. It's just not coming in the door that you think it's coming through.
Moving on here, I don't know, Dad, if you saw this, but there's a new electricity price index that has been released, which the electricity price index has soared to a new record at the start of 2014. At the same time, the production of electricity due to the shutdown in this report, according to this longer report, due to the shutdown of coal power plants, it has declined 6.6% in the last 5 to 6 years in the country's electricity production of power. The percentage of electricity use has risen to the highest since 2007. And the reason that, as I said, that the production or decline in production is said because the coal power plants, it says the decrease came from a decrease in the electricity produced by coal, which has been removed and not replaced. Therefore, the increase in electricity production produced by natural gas or the renewable sources of wind or solar energy has not taken their effect and replaced the electricity production of coal. And we know that the administration and part of their environmental justice, environmental action plan, the EPA, has pretty much launched a war on coal, saying they're going to shut down all new coal factories and putting huge emissions on coal-powered plants on their through regulation on their greenhouse gas emissions, is what they call them. But now the Supreme Court is going to hear some challenges to the EPA's application of the limit of greenhouse gas emissions from its own regulations. And this is from today. It says the Supreme Court on Monday will hear challenges to the EPA's application of limits of greenhouse gas emissions from stationary sources as power plants. Arguments made in briefs submitted to the courts include charges that the regulations by the EPA as part of President Obama's campaign to combat climate change amount to a usurpation of legislative power by the executive branch. So there's more than just the power of the EPA's regulative authority here. It's also challenging the authority of the executive orders that the president has been issuing. And it goes on to state that whether the Obama administration exceeded its power and its effect on certain industries of business. And they're talking about, this is putting the whole EPA's regulative process in here and the executive order process, which will, sadly, I think, negate what the true intention of this was to restore some of the power plants, coal power plants and different types of power plants that have been shut down under the administration. That is the issue that's being brought about the court, but since they're throwing these other things in here, those are going to take the main focus over the initial issue, from what I see. And that article's on the New American, Dad, if you want to check that out. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, look, there's a war against coal. There's a war against all dirty energy, so to speak. There's by this regime. we are made to become, we're being hobbled by regulations, by the Environmental Protection Agency, by the Obama regime, and we can even throw the fictitious science of climate or global warming into this. Now it's morphed into climate change, and of course, people will argue about climate change. If you look toward this winter and this, well, the recent couple of years, how the climate has seemingly been so bad. Well, yes, it's been bad, but the argument at its core is man-made versus just the way it is, and there. In fact, I just got a couple of notices where these arguments are not, or the actual. This is not. The climate change is not man-made. It's one of these cyclical things that are taking place. I guess what I'm saying to you is they're politicizing what's taking place in the climate. Of course, we know about this. But it's gonna end up being a tax, a more repressive tax, a more repressive way to enslave the population.
Well, what they say in the article here, is that the legal battle will no doubt have political repercussions. A decision for the plaintiffs at the nation's highest court would affirm that the executive branch overstepped the bounds of its constitutional authority. And it says, in recent years, the Obama administration, on issues ranging from the unauthorized war in Libya to selective non-enforcement of the nation's immigration laws, a ruling for the administration would likely encourage what they're doing, the agenda they're pushing, to continue and advance that. And a ruling for the plaintiff would then say that, could bring up questions as to the authority of his executive order. So I do not see the Supreme Court ruling against the government in this case.
Well, if you keep an eye on that, but I do believe this is all, if you look at this is all part of the larger agenda, and the larger agenda is the communist progressive agenda. And when we take a look at the bigger scale of things, and we see how everything is shaping up, in the end, take a few steps back, take a look at what's going on, whether it's climate change, whether it's the coal, whether it's the lead for the smelting plants for the bullets, whether it's or other things. Regardless of what it is, we're seeing this multifaceted war that's taking place by the government, waged by the government, by this particular regime. Although it transcends political party, this particular regime has been tasked with the idea to take down what's left of our manufacturing base, and of course that involves the middle class. So this is a war against the middle class. This is a war against the country as a whole, the sovereignty. This is a war against the dollar. All of these are interrelated, and we need to understand this. I had recently got a note from one of my sources. We were talking about the devaluation of the dollar, and of course, what Soros has been doing. And as I mentioned earlier, I was on the London, UK show broadcast, the People's Voice. Yes, and by the way, yes, I understand who the origins of that show, but I'll tell you what, the truth is the truth, and anyway, the information I have here is that if of course you have to look back a couple of decades ago, the UK had a pretty bad case of devaluation of the pound. It caused, folks, if you remember this, it caused just a horrific economic crisis for them. Now, sometime later, Soros caused some chaos with their currency again. The situation that we're looking at with the U.S. dollar, it's going to be orders of magnitude worse for us and for the world this time. And if it's the same players. It's the same players all the time, Soros and others. If we stumble here, if we make mistakes here, if we allow this to happen, if we watch this happening without any type of intervention, especially here in the United States with the U.S. dollar, the mantle of leadership of the free world that is based on the world reserve currency will ultimately be transferred back to the British Empire and the Commonwealth countries. Now, we talk about China. You talk about the yuan and such. But what ultimately is going to be taking place is the dollar, the power, the power of the world's reserve currency, the power, the economic power is going to be transferred back to the British Empire and its Commonwealth countries. The burden of maintaining order, world order, and stability goes along with that particular job of holding the world's reserve currency. Isn't it interesting that that we might be flying back again under the British flag? If you think about it, if you do this progression of events in your mind and think how this could play out. So, bottom line here, folks, is we are at a very precarious time financially, and let's be very careful. And let's watch, because all of these things are interconnected. We're just talking about the dirty energy, or what's called dirty energy, the coal, the lead, the various domestic issues here, even our foreign policy. All of this is really an attack, a coordinated asymmetrical attack against the United States, against the middle class in particular, to get the United States out of play. And as we look at things take place, look at the Ukraine. Look at what's happening in Ukraine.
I have a audio clip from Gerald Celente, who was interviewed on RT, and he talks about America's overt actions destabilizing Ukraine as never before is the title of this video. But he talks about how what the U.S.'s influence is here. And I'm going to play this now. It's 3.5 minutes. This is Gerald Celente on RT earlier today.
Let's get more on the situation in and around Kiev and in the entire country now. Live with Gerald Celente. He's Trends forecaster and publisher of the Trends Journal. Gerald, is it fair then to hold the government solely responsible for breaking the truce, punishing them with sanctions, and accusing them of actually escalating the violence there in Kiev?
Well, as an American, I'm not naive that our country's been involved in overthrowing a number of governments around the world. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, I could keep going on. I've never seen such overt action in destabilizing another country or putting America's 2 cents into it. And now this isn't speculation, these are facts. Because if you go back to December, the mid-December, at the National Press Club in Washington, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland giving a speech, sponsored, by the way, by Chevron, about what was going on in Ukraine, and how basically demanded that Ukraine join the European Union and sign the association agreement. These are efforts by the United States, the Europeans, European powers, to incorporate all of Eastern Europe and to isolate Russia. So when I say this isn't speculation. Anybody could go online and listen to her words. And she's also demanding that Ukraine obey the dictum set out by the IMF. And to use her words, there is, quote, no other path. So we're seeing Americans going to Ukraine and putting themselves in the center of this. It's like I've never seen before. I would like to read you a quote by Senator John McCain, who was in Ukraine in mid-December. So he put this all into perspective. This has nothing to do about democracy, as they keep talking about. This is only business. And he makes it very clear here. This is about the future you deserve, a future in Europe, a future of peace with all of your neighbors. The free world is with you. America is with you. I'm with you. So they're talking about business deals here, and that's all this is about.
So, Gerald, with that foreign pressure, the domestic pressure now on Yanukovych, is he going to survive? What's the future now?
I don't know, and it depends on how Russia plays into this as well. And if we heard Obama saying that he can't cross the line and put the people down more, is Putin going to say hold the line? So I don't know, but I think it's very important to put this all into perspective. The United States, according to Ms. Nuland, has spent $5 billion in Ukraine over the past few years. So this is about pushing Ukraine and saying that Ukrainians are European, when the polls are showing that I read coming out of there that most people are in favor of a Ukraine-Russian deal with other Eastern European countries rather than association with the European Union.
Gerald, thank you very much for your thoughts. Gerald Celente, live here on RT International.
He's always very good. By the way, David Gagan he's a contributor for our website, and that's HomelandSecurityUS.com. He had sent me an email today. I want to go through this a little bit because I think he offers an interesting perspective, as Celente does. Look, if you don't think, folks, that we don't have, we have intelligence assets in Ukraine really mucking things up. This is an intelligence operation, much like Arab Spring was and still is. Okay, if you study, and this according to David Gagan, and I've got to talk with him. I'd like to publish this and put this up. But he writes that the more that you study the situation in Ukraine, the more questions come to light. And boy, is that true. Once you start peeling back the layers of this onion, oh man, it is incredibly complex. It's long in the tooth as well, not simply some kind of flash mob that spontaneously sprang up in the last couple of weeks. This reminds me of Benghazi. The more you dig, the more you find that it actually goes back not days or weeks or months, but decades. You see, Obama is in the very unique position of being able to look back over this long advancement that involves strategically placed Ukraine, and from that vantage point, should be able to see it for what it is. And this is just me, I contend he not only sees it for what it is, he's up to it in his elbows. And then to realize that the real difference to be made from a perspective of world benefit is to do the adult thing and put an end to the meddling and machinations, admit the faults of the past, and give a boost to his utterly, failure of a regime. But that's not what's happening. You see, he's making it worse. He's under orders to bring it to closure. Now, it's hard to say when the mistreatment of Ukrainians first began. Ukraine was the whipping boy of Stalinist Russia, folks. If you know your history, and we know you do, being the most intelligent radio audience out there, and I say that without any reservations whatsoever, but if you look at what happened, Stalinist Russia did what they did to Ukraine, during which millions died of starvation. It was devastated in both of the previous world wars, and now it's upon being knocked about in this geopolitical war between Russia and the United States. Don't forget, the wars we're seeing right now, all of the actions, these are proxy actions. When's all this going to end? What have Ukrainian people done to deserve so much tribulation? Now, Mr. Gagan has pointed out to research articles which expose that seething behind the scenes of this alleged organic color revolution. A number of self-serving individuals and organizations working to create chaos and exploit it for everything it's worth, and there are, folks. But here he attempts to shed some more light on the situation. that which exposes corruption in governments of more than one country, whose manipulation and abuse of Ukraine goes to the very designs to seize and consolidate world domination through war, using the created situation as the springboard to start the process. The U.S., for its part, has been working at this for a very long time. And folks, you've got to believe that. It predates the Obama regime, certainly. But like you said, the Obama regime is not innocently having to deal with this legacy of highly unethical and illegal behavior. No, it's capitulating on the groundwork already laid by those administrations which preceded it, witnessed the actions and destructive words of John Kerry, as well as the, snafu created by Victoria Nuland and Geoffrey Pyatt. You know what I'm talking about. Remember that little bit of audio by Nuland? Folks, the thing is, we have to focus on what's taking place. We have to focus on what is taking place as events unfold. If you can focus in a particular way to the occupation of Kiev, for example, as a separate but constantly evolving event, there's an updated timeline of significant developments being maintained on the RT English website. You should check that out, folks. You can search the RT website and search for Kiev clashes using those keywords. And we'll be writing about this. I'll be writing about this extensively. As of this writing, there are already over 300 comments or 830 comments to that particular article. Some of them are interesting, some are quite enlightening. But the dynamics that drive the situation. If you've got to take a look at what's the underlayment here of what's going on in Ukraine. It's complicated. It's complex. It's layers upon layers upon layers of deception. You got to take a look at what's being called, what David Gagan calls Ukraine Gate. This refers to the scandal which has come to light involving State Department officials, one of whom is the ambassador to Ukraine, and of course Victoria Nuland. Now I referenced this just earlier here, the Assistant Secretary of State. Remember, Victoria Nuland, personally, folks, I've got no use for this woman based on her involvement in Benghazi and now Ukraine. There's supposedly confidential discussions about the subject of regime change in Ukraine have become such an incredible international controversy. Remember, they discussed this on a non-secure line in violation of national protocol. Despite this, they're blaming Russian intelligence for hacking a diplomatic channel anyway. Remember what Victoria Nuland said? Basically, the heck with Ukraine. Those, I'm paraphrasing, of course. The words were laden with expletives. But if you wanted the Russians to overhear what you're saying, that's exactly what the way I would have done it. And let's talk on a secure line or unsecure line, and let them eavesdrop, and then just and let it come to light. This is war by other means. This is asymmetrical warfare. Just remember that these are all proxy wars. And I was talking to W, and I'm still working on trying to get W's appearances isolated so we can hear them. But if we look at what's taking place, everything is a proxy. Everything is a proxy. Now, I want to just say this as well. Before World War I, you could see people were talking, weren't they, about the the events that were taking us on a war footing. Before the Great Depression, weren't there people warning about a financial catastrophe about to happen? People were seeing the events that were leading to the Great Depression. Before World War II, after World War I, and of course after the Great Depression, what do? We put such oppressive sanctions on Japan. We forced Japan into a war, and people spoke about this. There were warning signs. You know what? If there was an internet back then, I'll bet you they would be talking about it. They would have been talking about the Japanese sanctions and then the lead up to World War II. Right now, the United States is poking Putin with a prod. The West is poking Putin in Germany, in Ukraine. Ukraine is a chess piece. Don't forget, part of the collapse of the USSR, of the Soviet Union back in the 90s, the late 80s and early 90s, was low oil prices. Well, what's Ukraine? What's the value of Ukraine? Check out the oil maps there. All of this is really shoring up to something taking place. When you combine all of this with perhaps the economic situation, there are so many people right now, including W as a source, who believe that the opening salvo of whatever is about to come is probably going to arrive in the window from the first week of April to the first week of May. Think about that. And for those who know what I refer to, you can understand why. China appears to be ready to make some kind of major monetary announcement, it seems. And some experts have speculated that it will occur when? During that very same time period. I'll tell you what, folks, the gloves are coming off of Putin very soon. He's been playing right now rope-a-dope. Think about the fighters, if you're old enough to remember, if you're a guy, and if you watch the fights with Muhammad Ali. Remember, Muhammad Ali would tuck his arms in and take the blows while allowing his opponent to just wear themselves out. And then what would he do? He'd come out swinging. Well, there you have it. That kind of gives you an idea, in his words, in my source's words, of what's coming. And just remember this too: the modus operandi of the CIA has historically been to fund extremist groups, to stir up local hate, and then to let trouble erupt. The chaos, this particular chaos, is the work of Washington through various cronies. The absurd anti-democratic, if you will, European Union is being used by the U.S. to poke Russia with a stick, a big stick, I might add. And anyone who doesn't believe that the United States and the West is behind what's going on in the Ukraine is not paying attention. Folks, Russia is not Iraq. Putin is not going to sit and issue YouTubes from a hidden location before doing what he will do. And just to give you, in Ukraine, the last couple of days have been some of the most bloodiest days in this unrest. 77 at least killed in a 48-hour period.
Yeah, there's been a new a deal. It says Kiev has deal. Both Russia and protesters appear wary. A deal aimed at ending a lethal spiral of violence in Ukraine has begun to show a series of strains late Friday, just hours after it had been signed, with angry protesters shouting down opposition members of parliament in negotiating the accord, and a militant leader threatening armed attack if the president did not step down by morning. Russia joined France, Germany, Poland in mediating the settlement, introduced a further element of ominous uncertainty by declining to sign the accord, which reduces the power of the president, a firm ally of Moscow. This stirred fears that Moscow might now work to undo the deal through economic and other pressures as it did last year to subvert a proposed trade deal between the Ukraine and the European Union. Now, from what I understand, the Ukraine buys all its energy, natural gas, and such from Russia, and is trying to align itself with the European Union. And Russia, as a government, as you said, doesn't want that. Putin does not want to relinquish control, as he sees other of his proxy nations or allies being overthrown. And isn't it, interesting how they continue to go after countries that are allies of certain other countries, all in the same group, it seems, or allies of that group. It's no coincidence, for sure.
Well, one thing we have to remember, none of these protests are spontaneous. Just go back and think about the Benghazi. Think about Benghazi, for example. Or, better yet, think about Arab Spring. Arab Spring was not a spontaneous protest. You've got emails by the Brits and French, and between the Brits and French, and, of course, the United States, planning the Arab Spring, planning it. And the American people have fallen for this idea that it was just nothing but a spontaneous protest, and you've got MSNBCites who insist it was a spontaneous protest. Folks, the Ukraine is no different. And Dennis Z writes, "Hi. In Ukraine, the violence is nationwide, all cities, not just Kiev, of course." And I perhaps I should have made that more clear. These subways are shut down. Part of it is about the corrupt government that the people want to oust, but they want a normal democratic process. This is from my fiance in Odessa, where there is violence. The government is moving up the 2015 presidential election to maybe late this year. Dennis, thank you so much for that. Our prayers are with your fiance in Ukraine, in Odessa, I believe. Yes, in Ukraine. My goodness. But understand, folks, this is not a Republican-Democrat issue in the states here. This is not about that. This is about a globalist world takeover, a global reset. And the other thing, too, I think it's really important, and I was doing some studying on this and trying to really get a handle on this, because folks, don't you find it almost, it'll make you dizzy, if you try to find, to me anyway, it's how many things can you follow at one time? I mean, you've got all these things going on all at once, and goodness, it makes you dizzy. It's mentally draining. If you're the average person like me, sitting in your office or sitting at your desk on your computer, and you're trying to go over all of these headlines and understanding what they mean, and the one thing that I noticed, and I'll say this, the one thing I noticed is that it's extremely difficult to read, for example, something that the mainstream media will put out, and then to read or to read the actual accounts, we'll say through comments or through Twitter feed or whatever, as to what actually is taking place, and then try to balance the two, balance the stories. It's just not going to work out right, and the confusion reigns heavy. So here's what I've been able to really determine, just from my research, and take it or leave it. Do your own research or do your own studying on your own. But everything I've seen, whether it's the Ukraine or in Ukraine, or whether it's the events of the European Union, whether it's the collapse or pending collapse of the dollar, the various outside trading with outside of U.S. dollars with other countries. Doesn't it seem to you, folks, those of you who are following this as closely as you can, doesn't it seem to you that there's an element of timing involved here? Now think about what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you is there seems to be there seems to be some choreography being done. If you look at Ukraine, the violence there, the anti-government eruptions there, then you've got the various other countries in a totally separate issue, topic, idea, venue, whatever you want to call it, the creation of these non-U.S. dollar trading groups. And then you've got other things taking place all over the country, regardless of what it is. It seems like there is someone attempting to choreograph, time all of these events to a certain point. We can't let Ukraine get too far out of control. We've got to stoke it up and then pull it back a little bit. And then at the same time, we really can't cause the Middle East to erupt, at least not to Syria, not to this extent, or Iran, not to this extent. We have to pull it back a little bit, and then push it forward and pull it back. It seems as if this is one big play on a stage that's reaching this crescendo. But the crescendo's got to happen all at one time to be effective. The shock and awe. Remember the shock and awe from Iraq, or the lack thereof, perhaps? I think what we're seeing coming is we're going to see this opening salvo in the beginning of the first week of March into April. And think about the significance of that time period for the globalists, for the religion of the globalists, the belief systems of the globalists. And then after that, we'll see a continuous lead up to this crescendo. And that's what we're looking at. Now, it's a whole bunch of little things that are leading up to a larger event. And the larger event will be globally, and most likely the takedown of the global economy. Because what more really needs to be done than that? But this is what, based on my analysis, this is the only thing I can see, that this is so well choreographed, so well dictated, so well managed, that there's got to be a hidden hand or a gloved hand that's behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Just like we talked about with the media, just like we see with the financial industry, all this is coming to fruition in this time for a reason which is much beyond the comprehension of a normal, everyday, average citizen who pays no attention to things of God or things of outside of his own ability to understand them, I guess. And we see, people being changed, our society being corrupted and manipulated through the way men teach things and the way men want things, being part of the world. We're told not to be in the world and leave the world, yet the majority of people dive further into the lusts and desires of themselves, and therefore make themselves part of the world even more. And as you said, nothing is by accident. We see how this is all being choreographed, and this is America, its inception, and to also its destruction will be part of the plans here. And we can mitigate or delay the inevitable, that being through prayer and through repentance and remission of sins, and walking in obedience to God's law and by reading His Word. But that's the only way. And I mean, even that to a certain point will not do any good, because there will be a time when there will be an end of things, whether we're ready or not. And that's one of the things that we need to be mindful of, so we're always ready.
Well, precisely. And by the way, We had started out the program by mentioning the FCC and about their deal with their shelving their particular initiative. It's interesting to me if you look at history, if James Madison or Thomas Jefferson, if they came back from their graves, if they were brought back to life, they would not recognize this country. Now, we have been through some very troubling times before. I heard Glenn Beck talk about this a day or two ago, about the FCC rule or the FCC policy or initiative. But remember the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798? Do you remember those? The Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, when newspaper editors, civilians, or anybody who criticized the government were placed in jail. Think about that. Think about how history repeats itself. And you know, we talk about the domestic, all of the things that are happening here domestically. Don't forget, Lincoln himself suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. He even arrested members of the Maryland legislature and others around the country who objected to his policies. Folks, you know, we have this idea that this can't happen in America. You talk to anybody almost who's not awake, and they say, "Oh, that can't happen." Well, Lincoln threw Maryland state legislators in jail for crying out loud. Suspended habeas corpus. We had. How did Hoover's career, for example, if you want to just move up to the 20th century, how did he start out? Of course, the Red Raids in the early 1920s. Hundreds of people were arrested, some deported without due process at all. Wilson, First World War, he not only practically suspended but also discarded the First Amendment. Glenn Beck had made reference of this, and I don't think he expanded upon that. But the FCC, the machinations of the FCC, really, of course, under Wilson, the press was heavily regulated, I should say. Then, of course, during World War II, we saw the Japanese internment camps, followed by Senator Joe McCarthy's inquiries. Now, I happen to believe fully in Senator McCarthy. If you read Blacklisted by History, and I recommend that book to all by M. Stanton Evans, I believe that Senator Joe McCarthy was 100% accurate, that the government was in fact infiltrated by communists during that time period. And even today, you'll hear these occasional Hollywood types saying, talking about being blacklisted. Well, let me tell you something. There was more than a morsel of truth to what McCarthy was finding. But what we're dealing with now is exponentially more insidious than anything we've ever seen in the past. We are in the worst state, I believe, now than we've ever been in the history of this country. The surveillance state, when you've got Goldman Sachs and you've got J.P. Morgan and other big banks that are conducting surveillance in tandem with the NYPD and, of course, our intelligence agencies from a location in lower Manhattan, folks, we've got problems. We've got big problems. And think about those problems in the context of the Occupy Wall Street movements. You know, this country once operated under the United States Constitution. We are now, right now, for example, no longer under the U.S. Constitution, but we're under the U.S. Patriot Act, as well as other government initiatives.
Right.
You know, and
there's an article on Blacklisted News, U.S. Special Plans, the History of Deception and Perception Management. And it says a major controversy during the administration of George W. Bush used the use or misuse of intelligence with regard to Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, programs, and possible links between Iraq and al-Qaeda. The best-known elements of that controversy were Iraqi motivations behind the procurement of aluminum tubes, whether Iraqis sought to acquire uranium, From Niger, if Iraq was seeking to reconstitute its nuclear weapon program, and whether it was producing a stockpile of chemical or biological weapons. But another aspect of that controversy involved two components. Under Secretary of Defense Policy, the Office of Special Plans and Policy Counterterrorism Evaluation Group, during the Bush administration and after, there have been numerous accounts that either confused the functions of those offices or attributed actions to them that they never undertook. One potential cause for confusion is that the term special plans has been a euphemism for deception since World War II, and perception management, which included deception and truth projection since the mid-1970s. And during George W. Bush administration, the term apparently had a dual use as traditional euphemism for perception management as well as temporary title for planning with regard to Iraq, Iran, and counterterrorism.
Okay, let's deal with counterterrorism, because with every day that goes by, we're inching closer, we're further down that slope toward a police state here. Regardless of whether you talk about Iraq, Iran, or the axis of evil, or whatever, are those not factors that are being used to create the police state, the police clashes with the various protesters here in this country, even the small farmers, we can talk about that, and other so-called lawbreakers. We've got limits imposed now on our freedoms, boundaries of a police state that extends so far beyond the actions of law enforcement. Isn't this what we're seeing in the context of the external threats that ostensibly exist?
Yeah, and in this article they go on the list. They have all these documents that have been disclosed over the years that show how the War Department of the United States and under different branches, we get the Air Force or the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Navy, or actually there's an Army Psychological Operations Unit, which is listed in here, and it lists these different documents and projects where these people have used deception intently to manipulate one into a certain way of behaving. And we see this too often now. Deception is in every facet of our society, and it is messing up, through communications, the cognitive responses of people and deceiving them into different types of behaviors, and we're seeing the confusion of that today, and we're seeing how this is the continuation of deception after deception, and people believing it. If they continue to believe lies, no matter in what subject or issue, it usually will make them more prone to believe a lie in any issue. I mean, if that made sense.
And folks, I don't know whether you've heard of the movie. This is going back some time. It's a black and white film. It's called They Live. Have you folks seen that movie? Remember that movie? There's a bearded guy in the movie. It's called They Live. If you haven't seen this movie, I would definitely put that on a list of movies to see. I don't know if you can get it through Netflix or what, but think about this statement, because this is from the bearded man in the movie They Live. And this speaks directly at the heart of what we're talking about. He says the poor and the underclass, they're growing. Racial injustice and human rights are non-existent. They've created a repressive society, and we are their unwitting accomplices. They are dismantling the sleeping middle class. More and more people are becoming poor. We are their cattle. We are being bred for slavery. Folks, think about that. Think about that. You're listening to a very special Friday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. This is the lines open for your comments, your calls, your concerns. If you can, make them concise. And when you do call, in preparation thereof, please turn down your outside speakers. And also when you hear, well, at least when you hear your area code called, make sure your outside speakers are turned down so we don't get the feedback and make our ears bleed. But we'll open the phone lines for the show at the bottom of this hour. In the meantime,
I want to, if I can, jump in here. Paul McGuire references mainly Pete Hall's in some of his writings, and different in his newest book, Prophecy of the Future of America. And one of the things I came across that was written in one of his books says, here lies the solution to the greatest educational reform so necessary at this time. And he's talking about the time after creating this new community, being America, after the after a term of prosperity or time of prosperity. He says the only hope we have to build a nobility of man upon a sterility of narrow, competitive, materialistic, and educational policy. The ignorance of man has been his undoing. And it goes on to talk about how in religion the modern world will turn away from sound doctrine and set up artificial limitations through creeds and dogmas. And how through the departures of human thinking, through these different materialistic, what he mentioned, competition, materialism, that the common dream of man will be inspired through terror and modern warfare, through its natural beginning of in union, to come to one point of view, basically a one thought, one mindset, which is the false peace that the Bible talks about. And
yep, that's right. That's right.
But it's true. Ignorance of man has been his undoing. That is a profound statement because it is so true. And these people that have been in the shadows, have been in the secrets, understand this and play on this in a way that is evil yet genius at the same time. And that's the dilemma of the current state of affairs of man. They are ignorant, more so today than ever.
Well, yeah, and we have to look toward the ultimate objective here, what's happening. Of course, that's the one world order. But part of this, too, what's happening today, right now as we speak, folks, have you noticed what China is doing? Well, a big part of the equation here is the economy. And if we look at the economy from a global scale, and Michael Snyder from the Economic Collapse blog, he's written a lot of great articles. He's noted that in order for our current level of debt-fueled prosperity to continue, and that's exactly what it is, folks, this is a debt-based prosperity. In other words, the fiat currency, it just out of air, it's funded through debt. It's essentially like living on a credit card, without getting too deep into that. But anyway, the rest of the world must continue to use U.S. dollars to trade with one another. See, a lot of people don't get this. And despite the programs that we have with V and Steve and others, a lot of people still don't understand this. And I don't blame you for not being able to understand this, because to me sometimes it's not that, it's not that easy. It's not that cut and dry. So don't feel bad if you're out there scratching your head and saying, "Wait a minute, what in the world are they talking about? What is this? What's the derivative? What's this? What's that?" I'm there with you. But one thing that's easy to understand is that in order for us to survive as an economic power, all the other countries have got to use our dollars to trade with one another. They've got to agree. They've got to say, okay, we're going to use the U.S. dollar. And the way it started, well, think about it. The U.S. dollar, the United States, we were the country, and I don't know whether it was, I think Greg Jackson said it, we were the shining city on the hill. And there was a lot of integrity behind us and faith in us. Well, so it was easy for other countries to use our currency, to buy our debt. Well, other countries have got to continue to do this. They've got to continue to buy our debt at very low levels of interest. And the number one foreign nation that we depend on to participate in this system, as screwy as it is China. And you know, the Exhibit A, I suppose, of that would be Walmart. But there are other, of course, not so obvious exhibits, and that's the Treasury debt and what have you. But China accounts for more global trade than anyone else on the planet, even the United States. And most of that is conducted in U.S. dollars. So this does keep the demand for our money very high, and it ensures that we can import massive quantities of goods from overseas at a very low cost. Now, as a major exporting nation, China ends up with this gigantic pile of our money. Now think about this in your mind's eye. Think about this, because I think this is so important. And this addresses what V talks about, as talked about, and this is going to affect you and I, folks. So we buy goods from China on the cheap. They send us goods. We use our dollars. So they've got this massive pile of U.S. dollars over there, and we've got this massive supply of junk over here. And in some cases, junk is the right word. They lend us those dollars back. They lend the dollars back to us at low interest rates. Okay, now I'm going to say something here, and then I'm going to work backwards from it. And this is what V said. You know how China is buying up real estate, specifically commercial real estate in this country? You know where we are with respect to China, our trade with China, and they're buying up our debt and such? What's happening here? What can we expect to happen? We can expect that instead of these sweatshops in China where these young kids are there making the Nike shoes and the jeans and the widgets and whatever else they make, folks, those are going to be your children. Because you see, the very people in power today, the people at the Fed, the people at the too big to fail banks, all of these people working in unison with one another, they've sold our children out to slavery because they want to live in luxury. They want to live high. They want to live. They want to live for the here and now. Their attitude is, "I've got mine. It's just too bad for you," even to the children. So we have essentially sold our children out to slavery. Right now, China owns more of our national debt than any other country. If they decide right now to say, you know what, we quit, we're done, we're going to move away from the U.S. dollar and forget about the U.S. debt, we're not going to buy anymore, the prosperity of the United States, our economy, could disappear overnight. Remember a couple of years ago, and this might have been one of the last shows that Glenn Beck had done on Fox, he had like 5 or 6 or 7, maybe, I don't know, a dozen whiteboards out. And he painted this picture of the collapse of the U.S. dollar. Well, China was involved heavily in that. I mean, I remember that show vividly. And I believe you might be able to find it on YouTube, folks, if you look for it. But it was, I think it was 13 days of the collapse of our economy. Very well worth watching that. Even if you don't care for Glenn Beck, even if you don't like him, does that mean the message is not right, is not true? No, it doesn't. Don't shoot the messenger. And by the way, as an aside, I find it just extremely difficult, and I want to caution people about this. When we bring people on as guests, or when I'm on other programs or we're on other programs, we do our best to to get the truth out there. Our main goal is to educate the public, is to get the truth out there. If we have to borrow the microphone of a non-Christian, okay, to do so, we'll do it, as long as we can get the unmitigated truth out there. Does that make us non-Christians by grabbing the microphone or borrowing the microphone of a non-Christian? No, I don't think so. If we can change one person's, the way I look at it, and maybe I'm wrong, but the way I look at it is if I could change one person's life, one person's ideas, one person, then it's all worth it. But anyway, but look, China owes...
Depends on which way you change them.
Oh, yeah, of course. You were kidding, right? Okay. But China owns more of our national debt right now than any other country. So if they said, we're done, we're not going to play anymore, bang. The demand for the U.S. dollar would fall, prices would go up. There is no such thing, in my view, as deflation. If you talk, in those who want to talk about deflation versus hyperinflation, deflation is a fallacious concept, I believe, in the economy that we have right now. Interest rates on our debt, everything else in our financial system would go up to absolutely crippling levels. So it's so critical right now to our financial future that China continues to play the game in which we have created. Now, folks, right now there are signs that China is not wanting to continue to play this game. And they're looking for this smooth exit, not a rocky one, but a decent one to get out of the game. If you go back to November and look at some of Michael Snyder's writings from the Economic Collapse blog, he did write about how the Central Bank of China had announced that it was no longer in China's best interest to accumulate foreign exchange reserves, meaning that they don't want U.S. dollars. And we see this now because they're buying gold at record prices. Don't forget, as American shoppers were lined up on Black Friday in front of Best Buys and Walmarts and whatever other stores, the Chinese on New Year's Eve were lined up at malls to buy gold. That's right, to buy gold. Gold coins, gold bars, gold bullion. What do they know? At the urging, by the way, of the government. So what do they know that we don't know? I find it, personally, I find it interesting, and Joe and I talk about this a lot, to see how the Chinese view the economy, their own economy, their own their own status, station in life. They don't want they might have the iPads, iPods, and whatever, but they're not waiting in line on a Black Friday to get the big screen TV, but they will wait in line to buy the gold on New Year's Eve. We saw this happen last year. But here's the thing. China is now starting to dump U.S. debt. Well, they began actually in December. And there are a lot of people who have imagined that China would try to dump a flood of our debt onto the market just all at once. Now, for example, all at once, when they decided to stop playing the game and exit. But that doesn't really make sense. Instead, it makes sense for China to dump a debt at a time so that the market won't panic and they can actually maintain. In other words, rather than cause a panic by dumping everything at once, the debt that they're dumping will maintain its value. And China knows this, and so this is what they're doing. So since December, we've seen this. So we're seeing the signs right now that this global move is going against the United States. And what V said, the transfer of wealth from west to east. Now, furthermore, China has signed a number of international currency agreements with other nations. V talked about this over the last couple of years. That ultimately, with the ultimate objective, they're going to leave the U.S. dollars being used in international trade. Now, here within the last week or so, we heard that China is starting to dump more debt. Bloomberg reported recently that China dumped, what was it, like 50 or $75 billion of U.S. debt just during the month of December, and gradually increasing that in January. Now here it is, February 21st, and that rate is continuing. So we're looking at this from a larger perspective. What's China doing? Well, they're dumping U.S. debt, but they're not doing so to cause panic. They're doing it very methodically, so they can retain the value, or they can, in other words, they're going to retain that value. They're stockpiling gold. China has been stockpiling gold for quite some time. Remember, folks, 40 years in the United States. Where is our gold? Do we have any gold? Fort Knox. What's in Fort Knox? What's in the Fed? What's in gold? J.P. Morgan's vaults.
When I remember Ron Paul asking one of the people in the Fed about the gold and silver holdings, and it wasn't Bernanke, it was another chairman or member of the Federal Reserve Board, and he said, we don't own any gold. We don't own any precious metals. So
that's right.
And as a currency that is on paper stating that it's basically, our paper is basically, well, we know it's fiat, but it's basically a check. It is backed by the full credit of the United States. They issue these dollars.
At one time, that meant something, and right. We know that it's called the petrodollar now. And folks, let me reiterate this, because I think this is, and the people who have listened to this program on a daily basis know what I'm going to say. That petrodollar means that our military is able to ensure or assure the safety and security of delivery of oil and energy to other countries, or throughout the world, I should say. So in other words, the petrodollar, or the dollar, the U.S. dollar, the fiat, the Federal Reserve note that you've got in your pocket, what gives that value is not gold, is not silver. It's a level of the faith in the system that it's worth something, but in all practicality, it holds its value because it's a petrodollar to the extent that the United States can assure the free flow of delivery of oil and energy throughout the Western world. Now think about that too. As China's dumping their debt, let's say China makes a move for this Senkaku Islands and begins their mischief, or let's say through proxy, they will get North Korea to cause mischief in their own areas. And let's say at the very same time, you've got Iran causing some mischief. And Iran is a proxy of China and Russia. North Korea is a proxy of China. And you've got all of these proxy states causing troubles all throughout the globe, that the United States is not going to directly engage the militaries of North Korea or the militaries of others. But what we have to do is we have to spread out our naval assets and our military. Well, what happens is that dilutes our ability to assure the delivery or assure the safety of our of the oil, of the energy. And what happens? Well, pretty soon the petrodollar loses its value because we are unable to do that. So as China dumps their debt methodically, one step at a time, and other geopolitical events, and that's why we can never separate what's going on, whether it's in Russia, in Ukraine, in North Korea, in the Middle East. We can't separate that from the dollar collapse or the methodical takedown of the dollar. We've got to look at this as an intertwined mix. But China is I don't want to say hoarding. Well, that's basically what they're doing. Is they're stockpiling gold, and they are sending shockwaves through the financial markets because the financial markets are saying, "Holy cow, China's got more gold than we knew that we thought they had." And I mentioned 40 years ago. If you go back to 1971, August 1971, Nixon took us off the gold standard. Why? Because France wanted the gold that we had on reserve here that we were holding for them, and of course, Nixon said, "Look." Doing so would alter the value or alter the stability of the dollar. So to offset that request, he took us off. He ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, took us off the gold standard on August 15th, 1971. And you often heard me talk about the fact that this did happen on a Sunday night, and the real complaint by the people was that their Sunday evening show, television show, Bonanza, was interrupted, or Ponderosa, whatever it was interrupted by the Nixon speech, the televised speech. But fast forward 3 years, and I talked about this past week, but I think it's important to reiterate this. On July 3rd, 1974, what happened? Well, we saw 59-year-old Louise Auchincloss Boyer die. Now, she fell from the window of her 10th floor apartment at 530 East 86th Street, New York City. And you might be saying, "Oh, come on, I don't want to hear the story again." But we have to think about this in terms of the context of today. Now, the event, remember, it was ruled a suicide or probable suicide. It was reported on July 4th, 1974 in the New York Times. What's so important about this? One suicide in New York in the mid-70s. Well, Mrs. Boyer was the granddaughter of Colonel Edward Mandell House, the guy who guided the Federal Reserve Act through Congress for the Morgan family, for the Rockefellers, for the Warburgs, and so on. Jackie Kennedy's father, his name was Hugh Auchincloss. Jackie Kennedy's grandfather, helped John D. Rockefeller found or establish Standard Oil. Think about how all of this intertwines. Louise Auchincloss Boyer, her death started this firestorm of controversy, rocked this established thought of America. Who would think, for example, that our nation's gold reserves that were held at Fort Knox weren't there anymore? That's what she said. You see, Fort Knox gold drain was first discovered by this unnamed source who said there's no gold at Fort Knox, and newspapers ran the story about this informant, this mysterious informant. Well, the informant was found to be Louise Auchincloss Boyer, who said there is no gold at Fort Knox. The Tatler ran with it, the Globe ran with it, all the supermarket tabloids ran with it, and it's kind of a running joke even today by some members of the agencies. You remember the movie with Will Smith in it? What is it, Independence Day? And who's the other guy that Al Gore's roommate, Tommy Lee, Jones, whatever. Pointing to the tabloids and saying that's where the real news is, or something to that effect. Well, there's probably more truth to that than you might believe. But she was the one that touched off this International Monetary Fund, or the sounding of the alarm that there's no gold in Fort Knox. The Federal Reserve System was charged, or she was saying that the Federal Reserve System sold the U.S. gold supplies overseas to none other than David Rockefeller. She basically charged that the Rockefeller family was manipulating the Federal Reserve to sell off the Fort Knox gold at fire sale prices to anonymous European speculators who were really fronting for them. Well, why should we believe Louise Auchincloss Boyer just because of her family relationships. Because she was also the executive assistant to former Governor Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. And as I said before, Aldrich, that's Nelson's grandfather, the surname of Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller's grandfather, Senator Aldrich, who was one of the founders of the Federal Reserve. So look at this from a larger perspective than we're looking at it. And I was asked on London, in the London interview today, when this all started, and I said, well, the recent spate of suicides, these alleged suicides, began in January, and of course you can go back to 2008 and point those out. But I contend that the main suicide was really January 3rd, 1974, if you want to look back and you want to see when these all started. And all of this has to do with what we're talking about today. All of this has to do with the gilding, I should say, China's gold hoard. And if you look at people like Jim Willey, Jim Rickards, and others, I mean, we're talking about people, big names, calling for this economic reset. Now, how does this affect you and I?
Well, before you get into that, an article here on the Free Beacon, The Convergence of the Twain, and this is by Matthew Continentinelli. It says, over the last several weeks, reading news of disorder and upheaval from Venezuela to Ukraine to Iraq and Afghanistan, I have thought often of a poem written almost a century ago by Thomas Hardy, composed The Convergence of the Twain in memory of the sinking Titanic. Goes on to say, Hardy's theme is the vanity and fragility of progress and technological achievement of wealth and human power when compared to the immensity of the amoral nature. When I read the poem today, I'm drawn to its final stanzas where Hardy writes of the limits of human foresight, of sudden unexpected changes in fortune, of the horrible things that can result from the collision of desperate elements. What seems disconnected, separate, foreign, distant, estranged can suddenly cohere in terrible and revolutionary events. And it goes on to say, such as the Titanic, 9/11, Pearl Harbor, and it goes on to say that Hardy's poem begins with the image of the Titanic, a solitude of the sea. Deep from human vanity, it is a ruin. The frigid waters flow, the steel chambers in the engine room, and once late the Pyrrhus, and it goes through this poem, but it says, in the end it was destroyed, and what caused the wreckage? It says, the will that stirs and urges everything, as the engineers, mechanics, and builders fashioned that Titanic, they had no awareness of it. Unknown to them, the sinister ending for her, and it goes on to pretty much be used as a parable to what we see today in our U.S. foreign policy with John Kerry and Barack Obama. The abstract, aloof manner in which they comment and posture on foreign affairs. It's hard not to recall Hardy's metaphor to growing dangers distant from the earlier civilization. The recent news of a possible terrorist plot against airlines, the threat of the U.S. Embassy in Uganda, and more of these constant scuffles between in nations, from Libya to Egypt to the bullied and battled Jewish state that extends through Lebanon and Syria and western Iraq. And it goes on to say this is our iceberg.
Right. Well, okay, you mentioned, you spoke about the Titanic and the iceberg. Folks, one interesting footnote here, and it's probably should be more than a footnote. We talk about a lot of things on this program, and one of the things that I've found extremely interesting in looking at all of the available evidence, I find compelling. Convincing? Well, perhaps. I wouldn't go as far as saying convincing, but I would certainly say it's compelling. Would it surprise you? We were talking about the Titanic and the ice sinking an iceberg. Would it surprise you that there is a theory out there, and one that I've looked into, and I've got to tell you, I'm pretty certain there's a lot of truth to this. There is, of all things, a J.P. Morgan connection to the sinking of the Titanic. Next, you're going to be saying, "My gosh, Doug, you're going to J.P. Morgan killed Kennedy, or J.P. Morgan, caused whatever." But think about this: the sinking of the Titanic has resulted in some famous passengers' death of some famous passengers. And would it surprise you, folks, that some of the most important passengers who died in the wreck of the Titanic were, in fact, against the establishment of the Federal Reserve? Think about that for a moment. Back when the Titanic sank in 1912, America did not have a central bank. The Jesuits in America and internationally, the Jesuits in America and throughout the world, they wanted a central bank established. They wanted one located in America, a bank that they could use as this bottomless resource to fulfill their agenda by taking money and planning wars and plotting schemes and so on. Yes, the Jesuits. I'm sorry if that burst some people's bubbles, but it's the way it is. Just you can investigate this. In 1910, obviously we saw the 7 men who met Jekyll Island to form this central bank, later called the Federal Reserve Bank. Benjamin Strong was a representative there of J.P. Morgan. He was present at that meeting. Now, according to Jesuits, at this point, they wanted to do whatever they could to bring the Pope, or I shouldn't say the Pope, the Vatican to world supremacy, to world dominion. That's part of that was part of the plan. Now, don't shoot the messenger here. Please, I urge everyone to do their research. Very wealthy families, 3 of them, the Rothschilds, the Morgans, and the Rockefellers, were doing all the bidding when it came to the Jesuits' order. J.P. Morgan was scheduled to travel on the first voyage of the RMS Titanic, but he suddenly and inexplicably canceled at the very last moment. People say, "Well, what happened to Morgan? Why wasn't he on board?" If you look at this, J.P. Morgan could very well have been a big part on he would have been a very important person on this unsinkable ship. But anyway, the very people who were opposed to the Federal Reserve banks were aboard the Titanic. Now, there's other theories. And by the way, if you think about the Titanic and think about the circumstances surrounding the sinking of the Titanic, it would be like today. I mean, you have Laura Fuddy going down in an aircraft, inexplicably dying while others lived. You have the Titanic setting sail with insufficient number of lifeboats, with people on there who are against the Federal Reserve. It almost seems like these events are being choreographed and scripted. There are exceptional stories out there, exceptional reports about the Titanic. In fact, a couple of months ago, I believe it was, I had gone through some notes about the sinking of the Titanic and about the oddities, and even supposing there was a switch between the Olympic and the Titanic, and there were some other things that took place. But just think about this. Who in the world would go through a known ice field at full speed ahead in the dark of night when other ships weren't doing that? I mean, there are a lot of unanswered questions. You might think I'm a Looney Tune for even bringing this up. I submit to you that I would be remiss by not bringing this up, because you see the lie is bigger than we really realize, and we've got to look back in history. We've got to study history back further than the here and now to really understand the course that has been charted for us. If you feel like a pinball on the pinball machine, you've got every right to feel that way, especially when you consider the Titanic. So don't believe everything that you read. Certainly don't take my word for this. And you'll see stories on the internet, the Titanic conspiracy theories debunked and so on and so forth. I would urge you to step further beyond that. Go to your local library. Look up, grab a hold of actual physical books where you can read various articles about, or various stories about the Morgans and about the Federal Reserve and about the events surrounding the Titanic. I really would urge you to do that if you are so inclined, because there is more there than meets the eye. Trust me when I say that. Now, one person, and I'll say this, and I'm not sure which show it is or what broadcast episode it is, but one person who really got into the investigation of this, and I listened to this, it was some time ago, and frankly I forgot when it was. I think it was probably around April 12th or something, either 2010, 2011 or so, is the spaceman from A View from Space in 6:40 a.m. Toronto. Folks, you can just look up AM 640 Toronto Spaceman or AM 640 Toronto A View from Space, and somewhere out there's an archive of programs. You'll have to go through them and look through, find the appropriate program. But if you're interested, he lays out this fantastic tale of evidence. I say evidence over documentation because there are citable references that are genuine, that he's cited to show that there's something wrong there. Why do I bring this up? Why am I spending so much time on this? Because it's, as we've talked about before, there's nothing new under the sun. The templates for destruction have always, they're repeating themselves. I started this hour off talking about China. And about the issue with respect to the bankers and what's taking place, the economic conditions. China is beginning to make this move against the U.S. dollar. It didn't happen just this week or this year. This has been brewing for some time. But to get the huge picture, the real picture, the accurate picture, you've got to look at all of the aspects. From people talk about the Federal Reserve. Absolutely. How did that come into play? Do you think possibly the Titanic may have had something to do, or are you willing to just say, oh, that's hogwash, just dismiss it out of hand? If you want to do that, that's totally up to you. I submit, I contend, we look at the larger picture and we take all of the pieces of the puzzle and put them on the table. And the ones that don't fit, certainly, we can discard them. But the ones that do fit will give us a more accurate picture of what's taking place. That's my view. But folks, we're looking at this. Pay very close attention. Please pay very close attention now to the first week. For the month beginning, the first week of March into the first week of April. Please pay very close attention and overlay that. I'll just come right out and say it. Overlay that with the occult holidays. Think about that. The occult holidays. What do we see? What do we have? What do we have during that time period, the occult holidays?
Being the same as the ancient paganistic, the ancient Egyptian holidays as well.
Right. Well, and see, it's we are looking, while we as Christians, while we as believers are following God's law, the Luciferians, the people who are creating, in my view at least, are, and you can express your view based on your research, but they are creating, they're charting their course based on this satanic agenda, this Luciferian agenda. It doesn't matter if you and I believe it. It doesn't. It's kind of like voodoo, to me. And this is. I remember working at, just very quickly. I remember working a specific case one time with a local police department, and frankly, the situation involved a molestation and an assault case. But it grew from there into this. There was a voodoo component to it. Now, you think really a voodoo? I mean, in 1995, voodoo? Are you serious? And I do remember the one police officer who was called in. Even I think it was a profiler. Who said, you laugh at this and you think it's funny, and you don't believe this stuff. It doesn't matter. And I guess it goes back to the statement we always say: it doesn't matter what we believe; it matters what people believe. Insofar as belief is the driver of action among certain people. And I'll never forget that conversation that I had with this profiler. Actually, it was a federal law enforcement officer who said, look, these people believe that if you stick a pin in the belly of this doll, that the intended will, in fact, feel pain or have some sort of debilitating condition in that area, in the correspondent area. Okay. Now, the case was much larger than that and didn't involve assault, but the fact of the matter is, they believe this. So if you've got a group of people that are running the country, or at least influencing those who do run the country, and they believe, for example, that the period between April 1st, we'll say All Fool's Day, precisely 13 weeks since the New Year's Day through, or I'll even back up. I mean, from the winter solstice through the spring equinox and such, and of course the Maypole celebration. And I mean, if you're talking about people who believe in this, it doesn't matter what we believe. We're not operating on their calendar. They're operating on their calendar, and their actions are being derived from their system of belief. So before we say, oh, that's just baloney and toss it out, or, oh, that's just crazy talk, yeah, it might be crazy talk for any rational and sensible human being, but who said these people are rational and sensible? They wouldn't be trying to depopulate I mean, seriously, you talk about rational and sensible. Seriously, who sits in a meeting with Larry Grathwohl and others and say, we're going to exterminate however many millions of people? I mean, is that rational? Is that sensible? Of course not.
And guys, I know my mic's not the best right now. I've done everything to unhook it, rehook it, reset everything. So
yeah, I'm not hogging. Seriously, I'm not.
No,
really
I'm
hogging
just saying
the conversation.
People in chat have said
I know. I've been giving you time to do that. So I've
unhooked it, rehooked it, took it apart, put it back together, tried everything. But what I'll do is I'll turn this thing off and try it again. But these people, in their own writings, say that they have created these circumstances that we're in today to bring about the end, in order that their fathers can go home, which they believe they're going to sneak into heaven through some sort of sideway, as the Bible says those will. And sadly, and we see all the scriptures talking about the vanity, in thy own beauty, much like it talks about Lucifer in Isaiah 14, where it says, though thine exalt thyself above the stars, I will bring you down to the pit of hell. And through their perceived wisdom and cunningness, by deceiving all the people of the earth, they think they're going to sneak into heaven because they didn't actually, start the war, start the riots, start what happened. They just led humanity in the way that they needed to go to get there, that their hands are clean, but they're not.
Exactly.
I mean, why would you go through so much, you're doing everything to create all this wickedness, and at the same time justifying it by saying your hands are clean and thinking you're going to get into heaven when it would just be much easier to do it the way that God laid out. But no, is why God says He'll confound their knowledge and make them believe a lie.
Folks, I'll tell you what. Let's go to the phones. We're going to take the phone calls, and I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but we're going to take the phone calls in the order in which they receive. We're going to go to 7-8. Or I'm sorry, we're going to go to 2-5. 253 area code 253 area code. You're up on the Hagmann and Hagmann report.
Doug and Joe, good morning, gentlemen, from the other side of the
world. There
you
go.
Am I coming through okay?
Oh, good morning. How are you? You're coming through fabulous.
Well, we're doing...
how's the other side of the world doing?
Nice and warm, cloudy slightly, balcony doors open, and nothing exciting to report, except that you are getting a growing listenership amongst us old retired guys over here, and most of us, are retired military, government, or what have you, business, and some fairly astute individuals, and most of us think you guys are pretty much right on.
Wow, thanks. That's good. That's good to know. What concerns you the most is from your view on the other side of the globe, from America, what concerns you the most about America right now?
The economic situation and how whatever happens to the dollar will impact the rest of the worldwide economy. As you may know, in some of the Asian countries, they're pretty heavily dependent on overseas workers, particularly the Philippines, and a lot of Filipinos are working in the U.S. And changes in the value of dollar in the U.S., of course, will impact overseas remittance and will sure hit a lot of families in this country and a few others.
Can we stop this or walk this back? Is there any way possible that we can do this?
From what I see, I don't think there is. There are not enough concerned people. I speak with my relatives and friends in the U.S. Rather frequently, and the vast majority of them, even my kids, are walking around with eyes closed. This is not nice. I don't want to see it and hear it. Just let me live in my own little cocoon, and I'm happy in it. Regrettably, there's not enough people that wake up.
Yeah, you're right, and I see that here. I mean, with my neighbors, with my friend, and my family members. A lot of my family members don't have a clue. And boy, I'll tell you, if you want to be like me, I don't get invited to parties anymore, because I'm a downer pretty much. I go to a party and somebody asks me a question, I'll tell them what I think is, I'll give them my answer, and they don't want to hear that. So. But let me ask you, what are you doing to prepare for what's coming?
Well, I've sold all my property in the U.S. When I was there last year. I felt it was not wise to hold on to any. It certainly wasn't much, just a small condo in another small area. But I'm fairly well diversified as far as different types of foreign currencies and in metals, and the majority of this is offshore holdings. And I'm just trying to educate my own family particularly and trying to help them, encourage them to buy metals. In fact, some of the extra I have in the States I'm sending to my daughter. And I just actually bought one of those 360 food units from, I believe it was American Survival last week, and that you guys advertise. They were very helpful, and I had it sent to her, along with a few other survival items. So I might add they were extremely helpful. I live overseas, and, of course, I use a military address, and they were able to work out some of the California tax matters for me. So
Well, good.
That's the best thing I can say is people get prepared.
Do you think, and we have this conversation a lot, food to me is important, and I did sit down this week, and as I do often, but I sat down this week and I really thought, what is my level of priority if I had nothing or next to nothing, and that's kind of almost my case because I'm so spread out, in terms of, I've got debt, servicing debt. I've got a family. I've got elderly in-laws. I'm assisting and taking care of, supporting, trying to keep us on the air and all of this. But food-wise, okay. I don't want to sound like this is a contrived question, but are you planning food? For example, when you talk with your family members who are receptive, are you telling them to stock up on food, maybe to get them through a 60, 90-day period, or are you looking for a year period? What's the ideal here? The ideal number in your view?
Well, what I've done, I've talked on the 60 to 90 days, food and water. In fact, I've even purchased some stuff for my daughter directly and had it shipped to her.
Okay.
And I think they're in California, and with the drought coming up there and the water being reduced and everything like that for food crops and citrus crops, I think we're going to be hurting.
Okay.
The water's cut off in the California breadbasket there. And
right.
So anything that we stored and prepared and a little bit extra water to fix it up with, I think that's one of the highest priorities, along with, silver coins most likely, and the stock of medicine that you may need if there's anything special ongoing, and any other tradable items for barter.
Have you urged people, and this is something I've talked with others about, have you urged them to stock up on like liquor and cigarettes, because those are good, and even ammunition, because that's good. Those are good barter items.
Yes, they are, and I have. And over here, a number of us are stocked with some stuff out of the stores, so we could live for a couple, 3 weeks without the supermarkets, and also those would be very hot items over here for trading purposes. But yes, okay. I have encouraged that.
Now,
and that doesn't bother my Christian beliefs at all.
Nor mine, by the way. Now, I want to ask you something specific to you, and I don't want you to reveal your location or, a specific location, but given where you're at, how will the collapse of the U.S. dollar specifically affect you, your lifestyle? What do you see happening when the dollar loses its status as a world's reserve currency, and we get into this?
It won't affect me much at all because I have reserves here of local currency as well as food and other supplies that I need. Plus, we live off a local market, fresh market. We can go down the street about a block and buy our vegetables and fruit and some meats every day if we need to, and those, of course, are in local currencies. And I have a stock of that, which I will survive. I don't depend on dollars other than bringing them in about once a month and exchanging it for local currency. I don't keep a large stock of them.
What about the community members who don't think like you? Do you see riots and kind of like a replay of what would happen here in the States? I mean, would it be that bad, or would it be not quite as bad?
No, I don't think so, because the indigenous population over here, of course, is very extended family-oriented and used to going down to the local market and getting stuff as needed. And this barter local economy, this will continue for quite a while. It's not dollar-dependent. Most of the foreigners over here, retired military and government people and business people and what have you, most of them I've talked to do have a fair stock of what they need to survive for a few months. And they have relatives they can send out to the markets to get stuff. So the impact won't be nearly as bad as it is, I would foresee it in the States, because people live from, get off work at 4 o'clock and go to Safeway and buy dinner and go home and do the whole same thing next day.
Yeah, exactly. My final question in this interrogation, and I don't mean to make it sound like an interrogation, is do you have an extra room for my wife and I? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I've got space on the balcony. We could arrange.
We bring the sleeping bag and the and the dog. Well, hopefully you don't mind the dog and the sleeping bag and my wife, and we'll just bring our own buckets for sanitary purposes. I guess I don't know, but
well,
no,
we'd have to make sure the dog is not too well fed. You know, in several Asian countries, dogs are considered a delicacy.
Oh, man. See, we had to bring that up. Well, no, I do understand that. And now that I've dominated the line of questioning here, sir, is there anything that you want to say that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, a couple things. I really appreciate so much when V and Steve and Paul McGuire and Greg Jackson and Greg Evanson are on. These people I learn a tremendous amount from. And I consider myself relatively knowledgeable because of my past work and everything. But these guys are absolutely gems of knowledge. And when you guys weren't on the other day, I listened to you from 9 to noon in the mornings, my time. And hey, my whole day is ruined. We're Hagmann's. And
yeah.
So, with that comment, I would encourage people who do rely on you to the extent that I do to make a donation. I have tried to with PayPal and small things. I live on Social Security and Veterans Disability. But I figured you guys are more important to my daily knowledge base than about anything else. And I'm sure a lot of people feel the same. And if you don't mind me making a small plug, it certainly wouldn't hurt for those of us who do appreciate you make a contribution.
Wow. Well, thank you so very much for that. And you know what? You're... what means more to me and us and to Joe and I is your faith in us, and we will never squander that faith. And I got to tell you, in the coming weeks, we're going to be bringing on people that are going to just be mind-blowing in the information that they're going to provide. So I want you to stay tuned, and it's what we got planned are things that we never thought even 6 months ago would be possible. So we're looking forward to that.
One last comment. You did mention some occult holidays coming up.
Yes.
And I have not yet received my Hillary Clinton-approved occult holiday calendar. Mail's a little slow over here. So if there are any specific dates we should watch out for, I'd appreciate if you could enumerate those.
Well, I will say this, and this comes directly from my intelligence source. Watch April 5th. Through May 1st. And folks, I understand the significance of May 1st, the Maypole celebration, and what May 1st is all about, that being the end, the celebratory event of the culmination of this April 5th to May 1st period of time. This is the area to watch out for, sir, I really believe. The time period. I'm not saying something's going to happen during this time period, but I do believe a lot will be set up during this time period. How's that?
Well, thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate all your input that you have, and I'll let you get to other people, but God bless you. You're in my prayers, and you're appreciated more than you know by more people than you know, I am sure.
Wow. Well, that means a lot to us, and you're in our prayers as well. God bless you, sir. Thank you, and enjoy the sun and the sand between your toes and the temper.
On with hour number 3 of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Friday, February 21st, 2014. This story I came across a little bit earlier. California farmers will not get federal water without a little more rain, without a lot more rain and snow. Many California farmers caught in the state's drought can expect to receive no irrigation water this year from a vast system of rivers, canals and reservoirs interlacing the state's. Federal officials announced Friday. The Bureau of Reclamation released its first outlook on the year, saying that the agency will continue to monitor the rain and snowfall, but the grim levels so far prove that the state is in the throes of one of the driest periods in recorded history. Farmers who rely on this federally run Central Valley project received only 20% of their normal water allotment last year, and we're expecting this year's bad news. Some communities and endangered wildlife that rely on this federal water source will also suffer deep cuts. The state snowpack is at 29% of average for this time, which means that the farmers are going to have a hard year. All right, and I'm being told my sound's a little better?
Yeah.
Good.
Pretty much what that last caller had said as well. We have to watch the drought. And folks, droughts, these incidents of bad weather affect, on just normally, they affect food prices. And this is one of the things, when you're planning on creating a stockpile of food, or that's the wrong thing to say, when you're planning on stocking up your pantry for a rainy day. When I was looking at the prices of freeze-dried food, beef in particular, that crossed my mind, because we know beef prices are going to rise. I've seen it. I explained it to you during that live read. And frankly, it would be wise if you're going to purchase, we'll say, if in your plans you're going to be purchasing ground beef for your freeze-dried storage, I would do it soon before the prices rise. The same way if you've got a freezer. Now, when we're going to have part of our in the near future, we're going to have a couple of people on. I've got their names. I'll be contacting them. Some very, very intelligent people about food, how to prepare, exactly how to prepare. And but like if you got a freezer, I'm not sure how long ground beef or how long a steak or a piece of meat would last in a freezer wrapped properly. I suspect 6 months, a year. I don't know, but it would be good if you've got the ability, even before gold, silver. As long as you have water and perhaps a method of storage. But then again, you have to think too, what happens if the power goes out? Of course, if you live up here, I'm sure probably through mid-May we'll be able to stick the food outside if we had a freezer, and let the weather freeze the food. Seriously, I mean it's the winter's never going to end. But anyway. These are things to think about, as you mentioned, with the drought. And of course, it's going to affect the vegetables, and it's going to affect if you live in the United States or even in Canada. So we've got to really think about this. And, we need to be talking about gardens. Now, as we come upon the spring months, we have to, all of us probably should be thinking about gardens. Now, if you live in a condominium or an apartment in New York City, you're listening to this, we've got to have some alternatives for you. We've got to be thinking about that. How best can we help you or give you information that would best assist you in preparing? These are the things that keep me up at night in terms of helping others prepare. Living in a mobile home and where I live, very small piece of property. I couldn't have a huge garden. I certainly couldn't have chickens or cows. I suppose I could. I'm not sure my neighbors would really appreciate that. But we've got to be able to work this out together. Now, I know that, some people might say, that's just, you can just use common sense. Well, some people, if you're like me, you might need some additional help and hey, do this or this or this. And I know Holly Dale's book, Dare to Prepare, has a lot of good information, but even some of the more odd, off-the-wall questions. For one of the things I was thinking about, Joe, and I don't know whether you've seen these, you can buy, and folks, if you know what I'm talking about, you can buy these bags where you can grow tomatoes like upside down. Have you seen those? Okay, I mean, look, I've never tried them. I'd be interested to know if anyone else has ever tried them. If you've got space constraints, there's an idea. There are many things we can do. What about canning, for example? Can we can our own food? Of course we can. Pun intended. But no, I mean, and a lot of people listening to this will say, well, that's just basic stuff. Well, maybe to you it's basic. To someone else it might not be. But I think right now we need to get into this pre-war, mid-depression mentality. If we adhere to the mentality of our grandparents, or in some cases our parents, or maybe in some cases our great-grandparents, depending on your age, and learned how they survived the Depression, if they were one of the majority that were affected by this. Folks, our survival is at stake. We intend to occupy. We intend to fight. We intend to buck the system. But we also intend to take care of ourselves and, to the best that we can, take care of others. So, having said that, there have been people who have emailed me, sent me emails, saying that they would go over things like how to do certain things with respect to food preparation, very specific things. Other people talking about nutrition. Other people talking about other methods of preparation, very specific. Some people talking about wealth preservation. Other people talking about where, how to handle various urban and suburban riot situations. How to travel without being seen or without drawing attention to yourselves. When they say have a bug out bag ready, we understand what a bug out bag is, but if you have a bug out bag and certainly the will, but no bug out location, boy, that's a problem. But we have people that are willing to come on and talk about how to establish a bug out location or select one. In the weeks to come, I think these are the things linking up. And so, expect some, classes, courses that will help all. Because I do, folks, I really believe that we're approaching crunch time. I believe that we're approaching. Somebody had emailed me. A couple of people have emailed me about that. I live in Canada. How will it like for Canada? I've made inquiries about this. I've talked to people about this. I've talked to people in D.C. or in the surrounding areas there. Everything I've been able to come up with is the fact that you will have the same problems as Americans will. Now, south of the border, it'll be a lot different. But north of the border, it's going to be pretty much the same. You're going to be following suit. In some areas, you're going to get hit less. On some areas, you're going to be as equally as bad. With respect to the riots and the unrest, it's going to be bad. So that's all I've really have got to say about that. So just want to let you know about that. And Joe, go ahead.
Getting reports that they're interactive chat room that the sound is breaking up, and it sounds the same as that of last night. Hopefully, it's not that same fear that knock us off the air, but on the broadcast network, the Hagmann.com, you can go there for clear sound always on Blog Talk Radio. We're going to go back to the phones and take some calls, and we're going to go to area code 785. You're out now.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
How are you?
Hello? It seems like
Hi.
You're breaking up bad.
Okay. Well,
you
go
hear me
ahead. We can hear you. You go ahead and tell us what's on your mind.
Okay. One thing, there is a book that I've read, and sometimes when you're a little vague, if it wasn't for this book, I wouldn't probably have a clue as to what you're saying. But it's called Solving the Mystery of Babylon the Great by Edward Hendry. It puts a lot of dots and connects them really well. And it's a really good, I'm going to say it again, so everybody, if they want to write it down, they can. It's Solving the Mystery of Babylon the Great by Edward Hendry. And another thing that comes to mind is if we seek the kingdom of God first, all these things will be added unto us. And so with these dates that you're talking about, and I've read for about 30 years on the occult and these sort of things, so I can follow what you're saying. But also, I do believe that God is sovereign. And so on the 1st of April, it just happens to be the first of the year that God has selected, you know, by his word and how we're supposed to figure the first of the year. And so here we have two forces that are struggling for control, and God says he will give the beast the power until his prophecies are fulfilled, until his will is fulfilled. And so April 1st being the first of the new year according to God's word, and then May 1st, the last day of May, the first day of May, that's right, is also a new moon. And so in between here we have Passover, which should be very significant because I don't believe God changes at all. And so if he's going to pass over his people, we should be ready to receive his seal of approval and to get our life in order between now and then. And I just wanted to appeal to those that are listening with a broken and contrite heart as to what to do, because I see myself not being able to outspend, outgather, because God can scatter faster than we can gather. And if we are focused on the eternal, come what may, when our eyes are open on that great and awful day, we'll be in the right place. Anyway, I thank you for taking my call. I'm like the other fellow that called in from across the world. My day is definitely improved by hearing the Hagmann and Hagmann. I'm so glad that I came across you, and you're definitely my prayers, and pray for your safety and for your voices to go out around the world, because it does help so many of us. So thank you for taking my call.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words. We really appreciate that, and God bless you. And you stay safe out there. And thank you very much for the book recommendation. That, of course, is Solving the Mystery of Babylon the Great. It's by Edward Hendry, and you can find that on Amazon. It was published. In fact, this book was my goodness. I think it was published. I'm going to say several years ago. Well, no, it was 2011 actually, and the introduction is by Tex Mars. It's rather interesting. It has a different take. The subtitle, I should say too, by the way, is Tracking the Beast from the Synagogue through the Vatican, or to the Vatican, and it's kind of an interesting. It's an interesting take. Like anything else, we have to use our spiritual discernment. Yes, now I've not personally read the book, but it's out there, Solving the Mystery of Babylon the Great. Thank you so much for your recommendations. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, gentlemen. All
right. Good night. Good night. Joey, we've got so many great listeners and so many educated listeners. You know, folks, we don't just depend on us as well. Certainly expand your horizons by reading, and by reading other people, and take everything that you read under advisement and weigh it with your spiritual prayer. And but certainly there's no or we can never get too much knowledge, in my view. We can't get too much knowledge.
No, God, we can get too much knowledge. We can not get too much. It's God, knowledge of God and His.
Okay, we're going to have a wrestle match here, because I'm going to tell you
all
right
knowledge
now.
is not good knowledge. I mean, we could go in the book of Ecclesiastes.
Okay, here we go. Now it's a party. Here we go.
The different types of knowledge.
Look, I understand that. I understand that. But if you've got if you're walking along the football field and you see the enemy's playbook sitting on the bench, you're going to walk by, or you're going to pick up that book and read it?
No, we're told not to be ignorant of Satan's devices.
Thank you.
But I'm not saying that we need to understand all of how it is that, I mean, if we get so wrapped up in that without having the root foundation of the Lord's word ourselves,
do I have to position myself, Joe? Do I have to, every time I say that, do I have to say, well, now, don't forget, we have to have, I mean, so I've got to do that every single time. I've got to couch my advisement. Yes, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
Because
somebody could misinterpret that, who is not a common or everyday listener to the show. And
I'm not saying immerse yourself in the satanic playbook. I'm saying immerse yourself in the Word, but also understand the plans and machinations and the devices and schemes and the plots that are out there.
And I agree with you, but
I'm also saying understand history as well. But go on.
No, at the same time, it's important to reiterate that for people might not know where you're coming from. And we see, Freemasonry, that is what the Gnostics, is knowledge or information. That's what they worship, is their information. And it's what they use to destroy humans, is their perceived wisdom. So I'm just saying we have to make a distinction.
I agree with you on that. We do have to balance. We have to have balance, and we have to make the distinction. All I'm saying is, we cannot get enough knowledge, for example, of history, of how history is played out, because if we do understand all of the little nuances of, we'll say, the run-up to every great event in, especially American history or world history, it doesn't matter, the run-up to World War I, the run-up to the Great Depression, if we understand all of these factors, all of the nuances that happened during that time, the greater our understanding of past events, the better our understanding will be of what's taking place today. So let's study with some level of solemnness, of dedication to history, and understanding what the enemy is out to do to us. But first and foremost, yes, I agree with you, is the book of life, is the word of life. We have to worship. The other we have to acknowledge and at least understand, have a working understanding. Because without that, to me, we're only getting half the story. And I'll just finish it by saying this. Have you had any type of intellectual argument or disagreement with an evolutionist? Yes, I'm asking you. With somebody who says it's all evolution.
Not that I remember, no.
Okay.
I mean, but I've heard many arguments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I asked that question, and ladies and gentlemen, this is why I say I recommend this, is because when you've got the facts, for example, Greg Jackson's book, Conservative Comebacks to Liberal Lies. Now, you don't have to agree with everything he says in that book, but that book has a lot of facts in that, a lot of verifiable, citable facts, or you can use that to actually to win the argument, or to perhaps even cause the person who believes in evolution, for example, to second guess their own thought processes. And I'm not talking about the rabid, the person who's so rabid that they're unchangeable. I'm talking about being able to argue on an intellectual, or discuss or debate on an intellectual level, and match them word for word, and to counter their arguments with facts.
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, just that alone in the argument you're referring to, history alone can dictate, we can just look at science as how these people use it and use it for an agenda, but you look back in history and all the different scientists that had an opinion the world was flat and we revolved around the sun, or the sun revolved around the earth. All these great people who brought forth these ideas that were so held on to by the people of their time all proved to be wrong.
That's correct. And I think you're kind of proving my point as well. I agree with you, Joe. I mean, I understand that, but I think we have to I think we also have to be able to argue from a position or debate from a position of authority. We have to understand even the occult holidays, for example, to understand what happens, the significance of April 19th in the context of Waco, in the context of Oklahoma City, in the context of numerous other events.
Yeah, and in Ecclesiastes it talks about wisdom, and it says wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of the wise man are heard quite more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good. And it goes into much more about knowledge and wisdom and being a fool. You're a fool. He that say who is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him. And he said to everyone that he is a fool. If a spirit rise up against thee, leave not thy place. Yielding pacifieth great offenses. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low places. Goes on to talk about how with much wisdom bringeth much sorrow. And it gets into the difference between knowledge and wisdom and godly knowledge and earthly wisdom. So it is, you're right. I mean, we do need to understand the origins of these traditions, and we're told in the scriptures that the traditions of men are not the precepts of God. And yet we continue as a people to follow the traditions of men rather than the precepts of God. So as long as we do that, we will surely not be led down the proper path.
Very good. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Joe, go ahead and man the board so I don't accidentally send someone into orbit. But by the way, I want to thank I do want to thank a listener, Nano, for there's a photograph or a series of photographs that apparently is on social media and other places. It's before and after picture of what Syria, Ukraine, and Libya looked like before the West began destroying their countries, murdering innocent people, and how this can be and is being used to create this animosity, this animus toward the United States. And I got to tell you, the before and after of Ukraine, of Syria, and of Libya, it's shocking, and it is indeed important to understand. So that said, I just want to thank you, Nano, for sending that in, and we will, in fact, at some point put that up on our home site, HomelandSecurityUS.com. And lastly, if I can make two plugs before we go back to the phone. One plug is, folks, if you go to HomelandSecurityUS.com, posted there is a link to my appearance on the show in London that I did in London. It's a 20-minute video, and to me, I'll tell you what, I think it was a pretty good. I don't know, Joe. I don't know if you watched it, but I thought I did pretty well. Okay, and also on Sunday, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be a guest on Dave Hodges' The Common Sense Show from 11 p.m. Eastern until 1 a.m. Eastern. That's this Sunday. I thought I'd let you know that. So go ahead, Joe.
We're going to go to 504 area code. You're up next. You're live on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report.
Greetings from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Good evening.
Just want to reiterate what the last couple of callers have been saying. We thank God for you guys. You know, it is easy to feel all alone, you know, when your friends, fellow brothers and sisters at the church aren't interested in these things. They don't care. So it's good to have you guys and the great guests that you feature on your show. I wanted to talk about, what's that?
You know what? We care, and before we let you go, when you're done talking, I want to ask you if you were around during Katrina. But go ahead with what you're. Go ahead with.
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I'll get in that story if you want me to. But you guys have been talking about prepping and food storage.
Yes.
And everything, and yeah, we've been kind of at this since 2009 here, and I guess it's going to be time to start rotating the food that we have. I don't know, we started shelf life on some of this stuff. We got the food grade buckets. Went down to Whole Foods and just bought a bunch of raw lentils and beans and rice and stuff like that. Stuck them in airtight buckets and sealed them. And it's about almost 5 years later now. Got some MREs.
It's amazing, by the way.
It's
amazing how time flies. In rotating the stock is important. I just want to let you know. Yeah, that's right.
And of course, being in hurricane territory, we always picking up MREs everywhere. I'm not really sure how old these MREs for. We got about 10 cases of MREs sitting around, but I'm not really sure the shelf life on MREs even, or when they give them out to you, how old are they? We had, they were giving out MREs for Hurricane Isaac 2 years ago, but they might have been near the end of their shelf life when they were giving them away to the people. Who knows? So,
are you a fan of MREs? I mean, to me, MREs are a little difficult to. I'm not really a fan of them. I mean, I'll eat them, but
it's I know what you're saying. I had them, during Katrina. They were giving MREs to everybody, and I was even in the Superdome during that. But it's better than nothing. They really a lot of calories too. Remember, a lot of people just kept on eating the MREs after hurricane was over. A lot of people putting on a lot of weight around here. They don't take back a lot of calories. People got hooked on the MREs. Okay.
Okay. Wow.
So there's a lot of
Well, wait a second. You said you were in the Superdome during the Hurricane Katrina?
Well, I was pretty stupid. I was living right near, but then pretty much bicycling the walking distance of the Superdome back then, and I've been through the whole scenario before. They start screaming like it's the end of the world, and the hurricane comes and goes, and nothing happens. So I just kind of stayed in my apartment and did nothing. Thought, this will pass, and so I ended up in the dome for a week. But
how'd you like that? I mean, okay. Let me just start out by asking this: was it as bad as they said it was in the Superdome?
Well, I mean, if you were, I don't want to sound like a demeaning or or ugly about this, but if you're a rational, smart, level-headed person, no. Okay, I mean, but most of the people just aren't prepared for that kind of thing, and they just go bonkers within 48 hours, pandemonium. But if you're just a rational, kind of, I wasn't eating that much, but they did have plenty of food and water, but you just stayed the heck out of the dome and found yourself a place and found some like-minded people. But it is kind of like a microcosm of what might happen during an emergency situation. You seem really decided unraveling and go insane.
Okay, I get that.
The thing that they had liquor somehow, so I think people were carrying kegs of beer around and Crown Royal bottles, and there was plenty of pot, plenty of crack.
Were you able, if you wanted to leave, however, let me ask you this, if you wanted to leave, and I don't know if you tried, were you able to leave?
No.
Really?
That's pretty much the implication was we'll give you a warning shot in the back of the head if you try to leave. So.
Wow.
I mean, I remember the next morning, going, let me get out of here, and you're not going anywhere. And it's quite a shock to the American sensibilities to have your movements restricted like that. It's quite frightening, because we're not used to that in this country. Someone actually telling us we can't leave a certain place.
Well, yeah, at that point, frankly, it becomes a prison, and that's you're a prisoner there. And regardless of how nice, even if it was a mansion, and forgive me for even suggesting that, but even if it was a mansion, even if you're penned in a mansion and you're not allowed to leave, it's still prison. So regardless, but that I can't imagine what you went through, and I know people are saying, well, that's old news, but man, no, this is what's coming. I mean, this is what's coming to this country.
Well, that probably led towards my repentance and faith in Christ. I didn't really give myself to the Lord right then when it happened, but I'm sitting there thinking this is like hell, a type of hell. I did promise the Lord that I would give my life over to the Lord if I ever got out of there alive, and I did. Of course, I just blew it off for 4 years, and then was saved in 2009.
Yeah. Okay.
But to get back to the food prepping thing, I don't know if you want to hear more about the dome or not, but
well, no, go ahead. Sorry? And the reason for your call, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, so I mean, you only have a limited amount of space for water. That's the main thing, I mean, how much space? Just think of all the space you need to store water. I mean, that's the biggest thing, man. I mean,
I've got that.
Big barrels outside, to catch rainwater and stuff like that, and there's only so much water you could store.
Right.
So.
Right.
And food and everything, and people who live in smaller apartments, what are they going to do?
Exactly.
And,
exactly. So what do you do? What do you do?
I don't know. We have partially it's just me and my wife, and we don't have any children living here, so we have one room of the house dedicated to storage. But if the economy tanks, I think my job might have about 2 to 5 more years of where I work. I just kind of see the handwriting on the wall as far as the economy is concerned. And I'm almost 50 years old. So what are you going to do when you're mid-50s trying to look for a job? So the thing is, you don't pay your mortgage, you don't pay your property taxes, they come and take your house. And how long before, if you don't toe the line with Obamacare, they come and take your house?
Exactly.
What about food confiscation? I mean, obviously you're ordering all this stuff on the Internet. They know what you're ordering. They see you already going to places like Emergency Essentials and the companies that you guys recommend.
Right.
FreeStrikeHigh.com. They know you're purchasing that stuff.
Correct.
How long before they round it up,
Well, and I agree with that, but I think that there's going to be tiers of priority. For example, if you, I believe the first to be hit, looted, or whatever will be those warehouses, storage facilities with the food, with the larger supplies of food, of stored food. Now, that's not to say that you and I or people like us are not going to be targets if we order, especially from the neighborhood. And I worry more, I don't know about you, what about your neighbors? Do you worry more about your neighbors than perhaps the government?
Remember that Twilight Zone episode? The guy prepared the bomb shelter?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That
should be required watching. Exactly. And folks, the Twilight Zone episode, I don't know the name of it, but it's about a bomb shelter, the threat of nuclear war, and it's just for his family. And basically the entire neighborhood breaks in. That should be required watching for all of our listeners. But that said, yeah, it's... But you're right. I would have an inventory of water purification systems, straws, that type of thing for water.
Yeah, there's a lot of. Also, just to recommend something to the listeners, you could go to Dollar Tree, and there's a lot of stuff you can pick up really cheap for bartering purposes, like medicine, headache medicine, Tylenol, stuff like that. Personal items like soap, shampoo.
Every week. Yep. Every week
I spend about $20 or so at Dollar Tree. You can really build up a nice supply of barter items.
That's right.
People are going to want those creature comforts like shampoo, soap,
cologne,
lotion.
I've got I've got 6 dozen bars of Irish Spring in my pantry or in my closet in case anyone wants them. But and I think they were 50 cents a piece. Bought them, but things like that.
Canning is another thing you can do.
Yep.
So, but the only thing that worries me, Doug and Joe, is just like, losing a house. How long before they start coming after us,
Well, You're right, and at that point too, and I think everyone listening to this broadcast, we've got to ask ourselves: at what point do we fight? I mean, when we lose our house to, if we lose our house because we don't pay our mortgage payment, that's one thing. But if we lose our house because of some sort of Obamacare mandate footnote in this law, that's something completely different. And I think that we've got every right to protect our property, protect our wealth. And I think we have to come to terms with what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are you planning on doing, sir?
I don't know. I mean, I guess you just got to stay in prayer, and until I could definitely picture, pastors and area churches saying, you know what, this is of the Lord. The buses are coming in the morning. Everybody meet at the church at midnight and pray all night, and they get on those buses at 7 a.m. I could definitely picture a scenario like that happen. A Romans 13 kind of scenario. We got to render unto Caesar, that kind of thing.
Are you going to be one on the buses? Are you going to be one on the buses?
I don't think so, but
okay.
Hopefully we'll pray that we have the strength to wherewithal, the sensible fortitude to kind of resist that. But I could definitely picture something like that happening,
I can too.
Okay,
I can
Monday morning at 7 a.m., everybody meet at the church. The buses are going to start coming, and everybody gets to bring one bag.
Yeah. And I in Romans 13, I really want to have. It was Chuck Missler who wrote Romans 13. I think it's Chuck Missler. Chuck, I might be wrong on that. In the book about Romans 13,
Baldwin.
Baldwin.
Oh.
Chuck Baldwin. Thank
Who's
you.
that? Who wrote Romans 13?
Yeah, Chuck Baldwin wrote that. Excellent book. I've got it on my bookshelf right here, and I've got to tell you, he explains the clergy's bastardization of Romans 13 in a way that, frankly, I've never heard it explained, and I wanted to get him so badly on our show to explain that we are not to subjugate ourselves to this illegitimate authority.
Could you spell that last name for me, Chuck?
Baldwin. Chuck Baldwin. 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 Okay. Chuck Baldwin. Right.
Definitely have to
Thank
look.
you.
Definitely have to look.
Yeah.
But,
it's a short read. It's a short book. Yeah, but it's important.
by the way, I read that book that you recommended, an ebook, 1 second after.
Oh, do you like that?
It's I could do without the gratuitous taking of the Lord's name in vain, but it's very interesting. Yeah. Remember that scenario when they start deciding that they're rationing the food and decide that some people are more fit than others to receive rations? And why feed this guy here? He's dying. Why feed the old and the elderly? They're going to die anyway. We have a limited amount of food. We can't waste it on the feeble or the dying or the handicapped or the elderly. Remember that scene?
Vaguely, yes. Yeah. Now,
that's pretty heavy, huh?
It's extremely heavy, and when you get into I mean, you're talking about real life and death, potential life and death situations. 1 second after, it paints a very grim picture. And by the way, I was talking to someone who downloaded it on Audible.com through our website, and who was listening to it, and they said listening to it gave them nightmares. I mean, it was good. I shouldn't say gave them nightmares, but it woke them up. It had a totally different effect on them as opposed to reading the book. So I got to tell you,
I think it's about 13 to 14 hours to get through the whole thing if you listen to the audio file.
Right. Exactly.
And it took me that long to read it. I read it pretty quickly.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We will, whether or not this will happen in America, this 1 second after scenario or an EMP or whatever, we can expect some level of discomfort, dislocation, disjointment, to the point where, we're going to have to be making life or death decisions if we are not prepared. properly. And even if we are prepared, there's going to be issues that arise that we're going to have to be doing a lot of praying.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of Missler, man, he just had a conference, I think, last November. I don't know if you go to the 6640 podcast, you could get part of that conference. They do a roundtable on prepping, and I'm really surprised because I know Chuck Missler's pre-tribulation rapture, but he's even talking about, well, better be prepared, you better prep, this is just good stewardship, have a supply of food, have water, and most of those pre-trib guys, you don't really hear them talking about prepping a lot.
Well, I don't know about you, caller, but I've been hearing more and more of the normal population talking about prepping, and I've been hearing about this more and more. So the word is getting out there, and people are feeling something is not right spiritually. They're feeling something's not right.
Well, listen, good talking to you guys. One more thing before I let you go. Were you able to recover that Greg Jackson audio from Wednesday? Because I missed the show.
There was no audio from Wednesday. We were totally off. So we're going to have Greg on next week, I believe, and I got to tell you, he's got some of the things that he's got to say are just going to knock your socks off. So we'll let you know when he's back on or when he's coming on.
All right. Well, God bless you, Joe. God bless you, Doug. Thanks a lot for the program, and keep you in my prayers. Talk to you soon, hopefully.
All right. God bless you, my friend. Thanks for the call.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
We have time for one more call. Make it real quick. We're going to go to, let's see, 603. 603, we're coming to you. You're the last caller of the evening. What's on your mind tonight?
Hello?
Hello? That's you?
Hello?
That's you, sir. Ma'am, sir. 603?
Yes, this is New Hampshire. Doug, did you say you live in a trailer? In a mobile home?
No, I don't live in a mobile home.
To the people who listen, who are very low budgeted, have very limited funds, like the Bible says, you have to consider the ant. First you pray, and then you work like the ant. And I dehydrate, and I can, and you got to buy seeds because you can grow so many vegetables in the shade. You can grow them in a boot if you can put dirt in them. And I just want you to know that anointing, that oil anointing that Steve did with the pastor was life-changing. And I don't know if I can ever step in my church again. It's just a real blessing to have thought. My eyes are open. And if you go from pre-trib to, wow, the truth, preaching the real Jesus, it's life-changing. But I do encourage people, go buy a dehydrator. You can dehydrate your own casseroles so long as you keep them low-fat. And I know you're going to have people on that teach all of this. But if you can't afford it, you got to work hard. You got to go to the missions, and you got to go to the Salvation Army where they give out food. Make your own breadcrumbs. If you go to Asian markets or Indian markets, they keep the prices fair on rice, on huge bags of spices, on huge bags of salt. You got to pray and ask God to give you wisdom and to bring in those great deals of meat. I bought a pressure canner for $160, and I am pressure canning my own meat. I live in a city with 57,000 people, and I plan on sheltering in place and feeding everyone. And so I buy 50-pound bags of rice for $20 at BJ's Wholesale,
right?
And sugar. And I just plan on just staying here and letting God just take care of things. Letting God provide.
You're digging in, not bugging out, and using prayer and preparation to your advantage. And that's one thing, too, I'm very fascinated about is the canning of meat. I didn't realize before you could actually do that. Yeah,
it's a pressure canner.
Yeah.
And you actually toggle both the lid down, and I pressure canned up 7 quarts of ham. Somebody gave me a whole ham, one of the deli ones, cut it into cubes. For 90 minutes, it's blasted with 240 degrees of heat. And its shelf life is up to 10 years, so long as you keep it in the dark and at a cool temperature. And I know God wants me. I know God wants me to be here because, Doug, in the summer, the bushels of peaches and the bushels of tomatoes are just every day, bushels. It's incredible. So I have a bug-out bag if the house is